Welcome back to the Virtuos Codev Blueprint, the technical video series where we deep dive into the methodologies powering some of the most ambitious game productions. Today, we are unpacking a case study in global studio integration, looking at how external development acts as a true functional extension of a core team to support massive scope. We are focusing on Dune Awakening, the open world survival RPG from Funcom. Now that the game is officially out and players are exploring Arrakis, we want to look back at how this colossal world was built. To walk us through it, we are joined by an incredible panel of experts from Funcom, Black Shamrock, a Virtuos Studio, and Virtuos Chengdu. But before we crack on, I would like to let my guests to introduce themselves. Jeff, do you mind to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff, art production director here at Funcom. I've been working on Dune Awakening for over 7 years now since the start of the project. For those unaware, Dune Awakening is an open world survival game set in the Dune universe. There's a ton of crafting, RPG systems, cinematic storyline throughout the huge world.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm super happy to have you there and to talk more about the game and also from the perspective of Funcom. Ariana, do you mind to introduce yourself?
Hello, yes. My name is Ariana, yes, and I'm an executive producer in Black Shamrock, which is a Virtuos Studio. We are located in Dublin. From my recent experiences, the released games that I worked on is Grounded, Oblivion Remaster, as well as Dune Awakening, which was one of my favorite projects to work on. So I'm very happy to be here and talk about it more.
Welcome, Ariana. And what about you, Zhichao? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name is Ta Zhichao, and I'm the lead technical artist at Virtuos Chengdu Studio. I have been in the industry for over 8 years, and I'm specialized in the VFX and technical animation area. And I have been very fortunate to contribute to some major titles like Forza Horizon 5, Overwatch 2, and of course, Dune Awakening. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you.
Yeah, super happy to have you also on board, Zhichao. Well, Jeff, the Dune franchise is a cultural icon with an incredibly passionate fan base. Huh? So, how did you approach the immense responsibility of bringing this universe to life? And how did a close external development partnership, let's say, enable your team to better realize the massive version of Arrakis?
Yeah, right. So Dune is a very large, dense universe, right? Filled with vast deserts. One of the biggest challenges we've had on the project since the very start was creating a world that players could inhabit and survive in, whilst also kind of keeping it feel alive and varied, right? It's a lot of open deserts. And one of the things that we introduced early on was the idea of these testing stations. They're kind of essentially dungeons, underground areas where the players can explore. But for us visually, it was really an opportunity to give the player a much more kind of varied area to explore with different kind of themes, where it's much more kind of like green overgrown labs or mechanical mining outposts. This is one of the areas where the Virtuos team helped us with, Black Shamrock here in particular, but it also helped us throughout a variety of different areas since early on in the project, right? We had the Chengdu team supporting us with a lot of our art assets of characters, vehicles, props. We had the technical art team supporting with different effects, mostly on the VFX side, right? With some of the shield effects, sandstorms, worm displacement. Later, towards the end of the project, some support with our character creator and benchmark tool, which was a product that we released just before the launch of the game to drive a bit of hype around the launch of the game, where players could benchmark their hardware, see how the game was running for their computer, and create a character that they could later import into the main game once it launched. Regarding the collaboration with Virtuos, what worked really well for us was how we set up this partnership from day one, right? We really value autonomy and full integration of our codev partners. So we really try to integrate them fully into our studio and really be part of our internal teams. We run initially, of course, with a kind of kickoff, give them full access to all of our tools, systems, documentation, communication channels. And from there we go through all of our art bibles, style guides, technical metrics, art budgets, right? So the teams aren't just kind of executing on tasks necessarily, right? It's really operating alongside and with our internal teams as we're collaborating together.
Okay, so one of the elements that you mentioned are the testing stations. So let's look actually at them and deep dive a little bit into this specific part. So Black Shamrock and Virtuos Chengdu took on end-to-end ownership of the design and development of the 13 Imperial Testing Stations features in the game. This process required a tight transition pipeline from narrative briefs and 2D layouts all the way to final 3D environment engineered for deep environmental storytelling. Ariana, let's start with the creative translation. How did the Virtuos team stay true to Funcom's vision for the Imperial Testing Stations? Specifically, how did you manage that leap from the narrative brief to a full 3D environment, right, ensuring the unique identity of each of these 13 stations?
So I think that the testing station mandate was very interesting for us because the idea of testing stations was that they were locked for thousands of years. So there is interesting elements that we could introduce that you would not see on the planet itself. So, Arrakis is a desert, but ecolabs were the opportunity. I call them ecolabs because that's the code name we use in the game. So I'm sorry about be using it in many places. But basically, the idea was that this is where we can play with a lot of environmental storytelling, and this is where some action will be happening. But environmentally, there is a lot of diversity comparing to the rest of the game, so we could play a bit around those aspects. When we joined the project, there were a few testing stations that were already in progress, so that was a good base for us to get familiar with the concept of what the testing stations are and how to think about them, what is important about them, and what we should focus on, as well as take it as an example to the conceptualization of how they could look. So pretty much what we received at first were 2 narrative briefs for the testing stations, and what we came up with was looking at what is in the engine as well as reading the narrative briefs. We basically could start putting some ideas forward. So we created the 2D layouts and the design documents based on those narrative briefs. And that is the first thing that we delivered to basically see if we understand the vision properly, if we got the briefs right, the size of the testing stations as well, because it wasn't. I think we were experimenting with how big they can get to not lose their souls, but at the same time to give us that interesting story and storytelling around it to get there. So I think that was a pretty interesting start on the project. As it evolved further, one of our lead designers became a product owner for the Ecolabs. So this is where we were collaborating very closely with Funcom's narrative team, as well as with the other leads and directors. So basically at every stage of the pipeline, we had the review gates where we were having meetings and we were doing proper reviews and playtesting reviews to make sure it plays right, that we're telling the story as it should have been told, as well as just make sure that it's fun for the players. So that's pretty much I think the fun aspect was very important for us and for Funcom because those were quite unique areas. So we wanted to make sure that they play right and that they're fun to explore.
Yeah. Managing that volume across studios takes an incredible amount of synchronization. Ariana, since the design side was handled by Black Shamrock, could you walk us through the core design workflow and cross-studio alignment established during the creation phase?
So I think the way we made it work is that once we got the design document approved, and we had an art Bible that we had available, we basically were planning the props, we were planning the pieces of the modular kits, as well as the idea behind the testing stations was that they will be built using the prefabrication rooms. So that increases the efficiency as well as it, helps you move things around when needed. So I think that was the pretty big part of the production. So for botanical testing stations, we already had kind of like a visual benchmarks established by Funcom. So we were following that. We were building additional assets to basically tailor them to the story that we want to say. In terms of the other aspect, or rather other type of the testing stations, we were building the kits from scratch. So we had to make sure that they fit within the concept art provided, that they fit within the world from the outside, so externally as well as inside. And we were working very closely with the Chengdu team on that, because there was a lot of assets to be created, a lot of pieces of modular kits to be created. So we were having a very close collaboration with the team. We were meeting very regularly to make sure that we're aligned in terms of the sizes of the pieces, in terms of how they fit together, how they fit within the design aspect of it as well. And the Chengdu team was also helping us on creation of the big props. So there were like vehicles, for example. So those were to set dress the Ecolabs to make sure that they give us the vibes that we need from them. But I would say the very important thing during the concept, during the creation phase, was that we work very closely with Funcom and with our sister studios to make sure that any changes to the direction, any changes to the narrative, like anything that while playtesting we felt like needs to be highlighted more, or like, for example, we have to move assets around because we're not representing the narrative well enough, because you didn't really have excessive dialogues or like a narrator telling you a story. We had to tell the story through the environment. So I think that was a very big aspect of that. And we had to work very closely with both Funcom and with Chengdu to make sure that we get it right.
Okay. Zhichao, from the tech art perspective, how did your team support this on the ground when executing the level dressing and maintaining strict level metrics?
Okay, I think that's mostly our task as the environment art team, though I'm not personally the part of the environment art team, but that's something our artist fellow always mentioned about the fantastic collaboration between us and the BSD and Funcom. Because the first thing I think we need to align is the design matrix, just like Ariana said. We need to make sure we have the unified design matrix on the standardized scale, style, and technical specs. This could ensure our assets made by us could have fit perfectly together in the engine with their designs. I think there is actually mainly two aspects for the matrix. One is the interaction matrix. Is that something we defined the interactable assets, like how high a door should be, the door handle should be, so player could perfectly interact with it. And another matrix is the architecture matrix. That's mostly on the art side. Like we need to make sure we have the standard measurement for the building asset, for the modular asset, to ensure a very good gameplay feel. But for the art side, this is another side of story. Since we are doing the level art process, we also need to take care of the level dressing, especially. I think one of the level we did before is called it's one of the Ecolab levels. Yes, because firstly we need to doing the research what's the original purpose of this Ecolab is. Because before this Ecolab, this Ecolab was building, it should be the very new and clean places level. But after 1,000 years and during the endless conflict, it becomes like decay. So we need to make sure that everything is building in the right way. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Zhichao. So when you're building an open world survival game on Arrakis, a world density is everything. One of the primary content challenges on this project was populating the vast landscape with over 100 unique enemy bases and minicamps. To accomplish this efficiently without manual, asset-heavy workflows, the team implemented a modular prefabrication system. Ariana, let's talk about numbers and design, system design. With over 100 bases to build, how did the modular prefabrication system reduce manual asset swapping time for the designers?
Of course. So I think maybe I will start from the fact that we had two designers in Black Shamrock that were very embedded with the design team on the Funcom side that was very focused on creating the bases. Because as you mentioned, it's an open world game. You need to have a lot of things to do to feel interested, to keep the players engaged, but also to just basically bring more fun, especially in the desert world. There were thoughts about introducing some narrative aspects to the bases as well to make them more interesting, especially regarding the factions and like how they represent them. So what we noticed is that initially most of the bases were built manually, but as we were updating the assets, we ran into the issue that all of the assets that we were changing or the dressing had to be redone manually. And as the numbers were growing, because we had hundreds of bases, it became a very tiring work for all of the designers. So one of our designers, seeing how Ecolabs are built with the prefabrication rooms and like how it sped up the work, and it made it easier because we could basically replace an asset in all of the prefabrication rooms using that asset, which saved us a lot of time and left more space for creative work. We've made a proposal on how to basically introduce the prefabrication system into the bases to, is one of those solutions where you see that there is a work that is very manual, and we were looking into solutions on how to make it easier and improve velocity as well as, focus on the creative aspects of building those stations. So this was a proposal that we made to the Funcom leadership, and we did few adjustments after reviews, and that was the system that we rolled out for creation of the bases, which helped us build more of them and make them more interesting without constantly coming back to them and replacing the assets manually. Because I think that was a big hurdle. And of course, there was so many of them to build that we were trying to make it more efficient and, just focus on creating more of them and make them interesting instead of continuously coming back and replacing the assets in the bases that were created. So that's pretty much what the system was.
Yeah, and as every developer knows, requirements shift constantly during production. Jeff, how did this modular approach allow for rapid iteration when Funcom required changes to the world layout?
Yeah, right. So as you mentioned, like requirements do change, right? And these may be for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it may be when we're getting the bases or even the Ecolab testing stations that we were talking about previously, right? It's a very similar thing here. We'll review these internally, right? They're essentially combat spaces. So we'll test these out with the gameplay and how it feels to play. Maybe there'll be some reviews or requirements to change these in terms of layouts or different rooms you might encounter where things are placed, or even on a bigger level, right? A lot of what we do or we contributed internally here at Funcom was a lot of the world and biomes. We created a lot of procedural systems to create our landscapes and environment using Houdini and various other tools. So, as we're editing and changing and moving landscapes, right, things may need to move or change or fit to adjust certain different landscape or world changes like this, right? So any of these kind of modular or prefabricated systems really allow flexibility to adjust to any of these changes. As I say, whether that be to change a level in terms of level design for gameplay purposes or just to fit better within the world. This can scale up over time, as Ariana was mentioning, right? It allows a lot of flexibility in that regard. but also the team on a kind of separate level here in regards to scaling and modularity, right? The team also scales, right? Initially, it was a smaller group of level designers, level artists, and things like this, and then towards the middle of the collaboration, right, we start to introduce more lighting and other things to kind of support the full workflow here as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for your perspective on that. So now let's deep dive a little bit on another layer of the collaboration. So beyond the static environment, the world has to react seamlessly to the player. The engineering mandates on this project covered specialized behavior programming for combat, for NPCs and bosses, alongside specialized hardware integration. Zhichao, since Chengdu focused heavily on technical art and ambient VFX like Sandstorms and fire, how did your team construct these visual effects and custom materials to ensure these hazardous combat environments felt native and intense without impacting game stability?
I think the key here is hit communication. Yeah, because it could be very challenging, but our tech artists really love the task we are working, collaborating with Funcom. For instance, the Sandstorm. The Sandstorm is posed a great significant threat to the players in the Dual Awakening. So it's massive and it usually appears gradually. We have 3 different levels of the Sandstorm. And our job is to trying to make sure the 3 levels of Sandstorm can blend in perfectly and seamlessly. So our main task for the Sandstorm part is doing the optimization for overall feelings and fix potential bugs and doing the performance optimization path to ensure it runs smoothly. So first thing we have done is on the volumetric, doing the research, it's on the volumetric material itself. Because the purpose of this material is for the player outside of the Sandstorm. So the player could see the overall shape of the Sandstorm. And when the player entering the Sandstorm, everything, the volumetric material is removed. It will basically just post-processing and the particle effect when players enter it. But the overall feeling is coming from the volumetric material. So we need to tune in a shader, make sure the lighting and the color doing the correctly. We need to adjusting the parameters to make sure the final visual output fits the design at each stage. And the Rich and Morgan's team has really been helping us a lot on this task. And after the volumetric Sandstorm was done, the next step is to adding some gameplay elements inside the storm. For one instance, we are doing the lightning inside the storm because the lightning flashes could light up the Sandstorm's interior. That could potentially increasing the view distance of the player. The player could spot it other creatures, other players, and mind ball clouds inside of it. So we are using the Niagara system to doing the lighting to make sure it would appear correctly and give players the feelings of the threatening and calm of it. Yeah. And for another tech art task we are doing is a Holtzman shield effect. This is a really interesting system to working on because this is something we have built together with the tech art team of Funcom. The initial idea is we need to building a solution for the Holtzman shield, which is a very key effect and key visual for the Dune series. It's a solution, we need to come up with solutions for character, vehicles, and buildings, which tries to active the Holtzman shield. It needs to be the subtle blue glowing when the shield is on, and it needs to have the blue impact when the shield is attacked. And if you are using the melee weapon and stock, it could have the red damage effect when the shield is showing the penetrate. So we have done a lot of research before. One mistake we make is we using the latest movie as the visual reference. And the visual results we come out in the first revision, I think it's amazing. It looks exactly like the game, like the movie. And the feedback we got is it looks too much like the movie because we are building the MMO game here. We need to considering the gameplay balance because in the Dune series movie, the Holtzman shield, the overall visual is very subtle because it's designed to be so. You don't want anyone from miles away to see you activating the shield. But this is the MMORPG, and our gameplay requires the player to see from miles away if the other player and all other NPCs have activating the shield, so we could have our gameplay strategy modified accordingly. So the end result we need to modify it greatly, but the overall system is great, and the collaboration process is really amazing. We really love the whole process we are having with the Funcom tech art team. Yeah.
Yeah, so talking about the players, before the massive full launch, getting specialized tools into the hand of the community was a vital milestone. A key mandate here involved moving the existing character creator into a standalone version of the pre-release demo. Ariana, decoupling a deep core feature like a character creator from a live shifting game engine is notoriously complex. So what was the technical process for decoupling the character creator from the main game engine to create a functional standalone demo?
So another mandate when we joined our forces with Funcom was to work on the character creator and benchmark tooling to basically hype the players, but also prepare them to check if their machines will be able to handle the game or what type of settings they would need to set the game at to make sure that it runs properly on their machines. So I think there were a few challenges regarding that tooling, and one of them was that the Dune Awakening is an online MMO. So all systems are made to be working online. So like NPCs or like logic on the server or specific behaviors. So we had to port them to the local offline server to give representative view of the game. And of course, that came with challenges. And another thing to mention is that the game was still in development. It was in the final stages of development, but there were still changes happening. So we had to make sure that whatever we have in our offline version represents what is in the game once it launches, right? So we were trying to keep it as up to date as possible. In terms of the character creator, we had to make sure that it's matching what's in the main game. So addressing any issues around character creator. We also had to make sure that the character that the players can create in the benchmark can be ported to the main game on launch. So that was something that required a lot of technical experimenting and alignment with the Funcom team to make sure that whatever we propose will work and that we make sure it works. So there is no problems once the game launches. We also had some areas like while we were working on it, the localization was introduced. So we also had to make sure that we support that feature in the offline version of it. So we were working very closely with the localization producer as well on the Funcom site to just make sure that everything we have is the latest. We were working with schedules when the translations will come in to just make sure that we have it on time when the benchmark is to be released. I would say another important consideration was that the benchmarking aspect of it. So we had like 3 different areas of the game that were showed through the fly-through. So the challenge was that to showcase the real behaviors, the porting NPC logic to local client could produce different results every time you play it. So that was something that we really needed to account for, especially when preparing the stages to what the player will see, because that was especially visible when we were watching the, different aspects where NPCs are doing their behaviors. So we had to curate it pretty well to make sure that that aspect is taken into the account and that what the players see really represents the game.
Thanks, Ariana, for your perspective on it. So now let's talk about the last layer of this collaboration. So let's have a deeper look at the sheer artistic scale of this world. So to realize an authentic Arrakis, Virtuos Chengdu executed a massive, large-scale art production mandate alongside the Black Shamrock team. This scope span building kits and modular kits, environmental assets like vegetation, furniture, and props, detailed character outfits, heads, hair, and creatures, hard surfaces like vehicles, dynamic gameplay and ambient VFX, and technical art including terrain, custom materials, and lighting effects. Zhichao, this is an immense undertaking with such a wide scope from character arts to technical art. How did the team maintain stylistic and technical cohesion?
For the art perspective, we are really beneficial from the customized layered material system developed by the talented folks in the Funcom team. With this system, our artists in Virtuos Chengdu could focus on the visual output itself without worrying too much about the performance, because the layer material approach is creating the dynamic material setup that requires low performance and memory cost. So we're doing that by using a lot of shared tileable textures and standardized material system setup. So artists could only focus on their creativity. And on Virtuos Chengdu side, we also have the material artists help the Funcom team to finalize the layered material library. And we are also creating the new tileable material for shared assets for all across the entire game. And for the tech art side, we mostly have two types of collaboration methods. One is about tooling, like our tech artist is developing tools to help the artists across all studios to reduce redundant work for their art team. And the other type feature is like the feature development and optimization. It's just like the Sandstorm task we talked before. This type of task usually is more interesting to the technical artist, because writing tools sometimes can be boring, but writing the enormous system like this is really interesting, but it's more challenging, and the communication here is the key. For one thing, the Sandstorm, we already mentioned, we also have the task for the Sandworm displacement. That's something we built together with graphic engineer team with Funcom, because they have built a credible system for the dynamic landscape displacement. On top of it, we have to build the effect when the sandworm that's extruded from the ground. So the landscape need to move with it and have the same shape of the sandworm itself. We're using the Houdini to doing the simulation and compressed it to 16-bit of height map for every n frames. Eventually, we output the flipbook map and use it for the sandworm extruding effect. So I think the communication and the collaboration here is the key, because Funcom has their very talented tech artists, and Virtuos, we also have many talented tech artists. We can build the system on top of each other, and I think that's the key of the success.
Yeah, thanks Zhichao for your perspective about how to manage this massive workload. So talking about communication, Jeff, managing this high volume influx of diverse assets can easily overwhelm, I guess, an engine if not tightly integrated. So how did the art pipeline adapt to ensure that high volume asset production didn't create a bottleneck for the engineering teams?
This really needs to be tackled on a few different fronts, right? It really starts at the beginning with setting up documentation, right? Clear documentation of, I mean, it very much depends on the task at hand, right? Some may be a bit more technical than others, but of course, like poly count budgets, texture resolutions, different shader material guidelines, even basic things like naming conventions, right? That need to be followed. This is really the kind of foundation that starts this work here, that we work, of course, internally. And as I mentioned previously, right, sharing these with our various teams. that are supporting us. But documentation doesn't alone solve the problem, right? So we have to develop, or we did develop a variety of validation tools, right? We have tools that check assets both on import to ensure that they're adhering to these various budgets that we've set up, as well as different validation tools on submit, right? Because we want to ensure that various things are not breaking builds or having certain dependencies with other files and systems across the board. So yeah, there's a kind of multi-layered step to some of these. Though honestly, the strain where we feel the most when it comes to scaling isn't so much tooling, it's more like with reviews, right? It's a huge additional volume of reviews that we're having to carry out because a lot of the people who are responsible for reviewing are both reviewing internal teams' work as well as external teams' work. So the bottleneck is sometimes around reviews and the human process that's required here, right? What really helped here was some of the integration of the different teams, right? We were collaborating together, like Zhichao was just mentioning. There was a great back and forth between technical teams in regards to working together and following some of these processes so that it wasn't issues later down the road. This essentially meant that various issues were kind of caught early and solved before they became a real bottleneck down the line.
Yeah, super thanks, Jeff, again for your take on this. So we are done with the high level, let's say, elements of this collaboration between Funcom, Black Shamrock, and Virtuos Chengdu. I would like to say a big thanks to my guest. I know that you are super busy, and a special thanks to you guys at Funcom. So I'm addressing now a message to our viewers. So if you want to figure out more about the work of Virtuos with other partners, feel free to reach our YouTube channel or to follow us on LinkedIn and the different social media. So until the next episode, I wish you the best and let's catch up online. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.